This year was my first time attending the New York City Yarn Crawl. And you might be wondering what exactly is a yarn crawl? And it's just what it sounds like. It's like a bar crawl, but for yarn. So instead of going from bar to bar and buying drinks, you are going from yarn to yarn store buying yarn. It's the first time I attended it, even though I've lived in New York City for a while now, because for whatever reason or other, I'm either not in the city at the time or like in a tight budget. But this year, I really made it a point to be part of the yarn crawl, and I really don't regret it, even though the weather was not really on my side that day. I had a lot of fun. So the way it works, the yarn crawl lasts for 3 days, and during that time, you are encouraged to go to all of the yarn stores that are participating in the city, which as far as I know is every yarn store in New York City. It's usually, like I said, 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I knew that I would only really have time to go for 1 day. So I tried to fit as many yarn stores as I could in 1 day. And there is a really nice map that the yarn crawl organizes and posts for you to follow. And so as you can see, there are quite a lot of yarn stores that you can go to for the yarn crawl. It seemed to me a little easier if I stuck to one part of geography almost, to Brooklyn, for several reasons. One is that I don't live in Brooklyn, so I don't actually go to Brooklyn that often because it's kind of out of the way for me. And I don't know a lot of these yarn stores in Brooklyn. Some of them I've heard of, some of them I walked by, but I've actually never been to any of them, crazy enough. It's just kind of hard to get for me, and so if I made it a point during the yarn crawl to actually visit them, maybe from now on I'll make it more of a point to go again. And so I did not really intend to go to all of the Brooklyn yarn stores, but I did end up doing that. So let me tell you how my yarn crawl experience went. So I asked my friend if she wanted to come with me, my friend Alia, and she very graciously offered to drive us around to the yarn stores. This ended up being the best option because that day it was raining really, really bad and like on and off all day. So it was kind of a not great day to be outside. And if you have ever been to New York City and taken the subway system on a weekend with rain, you'll know that that is a recipe for disaster. So what we did is we met up in Brooklyn. And then she drove us around to each one of the yarn stores, and we kind of try to go south to north. So we started at the southernmost yarn store, which was Argyle. I had never been to Argyle, and it's kind of close to Prospect Park on the west side, like in between Greenwood Cemetery and Prospect Park West, if you know Brooklyn. And it's a nice little store. It was a great place to start. It was actually one of my favorite stores at the end, even though it was the first one. And the hard thing for me when you're doing any kind of event where you're going to more than one yarn store or yarn stand is that it's really hard not to want to buy everything in the first store, right? Like to really get into it. You get excited and you want to spend all your money. And so you kind of have to think about how do you organize yourself to be able to go through all the different places and still not spend it all on the first try. The nice thing about the yarn crawl is that it's not just about going to all these different stores and the community, but there's also raffles, there's events, and all of the stores, at least all the ones that I went to, had 10% off. So it was actually a really good deal for a lot of these yarn stores to buy yarn. And even though this year I had promised myself that I wasn't going to spend any money in yarn, I did buy some yarn, and I'll show you later. But anyway, starting at Argyle, it's a nice little store. I really like that they have their in-house brand, Luminous Brooklyn, and they had a lot of different versions of the same colorway, so you could find it in different weights of the same colorway. They also had a stand that had 40% of yarn, and that was extremely tempting, and I almost did buy some of it. It was some Quinnsco yarn that looked beautiful, but it was sport weight. And one of the ways that I check myself when I go to events like this so that I don't, buy yarn that I'm not actually gonna use later, or that, I'm trying to be very conscious of about what I bring into my stash. So I do always have a list of projects that I'm really looking forward to knitting and what yarn is required for those projects. Therefore, there was nothing in my list that included sport yarn, and I held myself back and didn't buy any. And in fact, a few minutes later, when we're looking around the store, I saw other people almost grabbing all of the yarn that was in that basket. So I kind of lost my chance, but I'm glad that I was strong. It was really tempting. But anyway, they had they had a really nice collection of yarn. They also had mulled wine and I think iced tea for free, which was really sweet of them. And every store, the way the raffle works is like a big raffle for the event where you sign up every time you arrive to a store in like a computer or an iPad and hopefully win something in the raffle. They have some really amazing prizes. So, I mean, I don't think I won anything, but at least I did sign in all of the stores. Then from Argyle, and I'll show you, and you can see on the map how we're going north. The next stop was Brooklyn General Store. So Brooklyn General Store, I also had never been inside, but I've walked by it in the past. It is such a big store, like very big contrast from Argyle. A lot of yarn, but I also like that they are not just focused on yarn. It's a store that has all kinds of craft. So they also have a really beautiful collection of fabric, especially like quilting fabric. They have some notions as well, buttons and tools and all kinds of things. So that store was super, super busy, I will say. But we also spent quite a while there. I actually really enjoyed going into that store, and I definitely will be back, especially thinking about buying some maybe fabric at some point for making another quilt. If you want to see me making my first quilt, there's a video somewhere in my channel. I will link it below. But yeah, so I had a lot of fun in Brooklyn General. And I also bought some yarn, which I will tell you about in a little bit. I think at that point we had spent about an hour at each of the stores so far. So we kind of wanted to get moving so that we would be able to go to another store. If it hadn't been raining, we probably would have walked to the next store, but because the weather was really not cooperating, and those stores are not that far apart, like again, usually we would just walk, but we ended up driving and we went to the next one, which is Woolen. I never actually seen Woolen or heard of it. It's in Cobble Hill, so like the neighborhood right next to Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn, and very close to the water. Yeah, I'd never been to that store or heard of it actually up until now. So that was exciting to find a new yarn store. And again, this was a smaller yarn store and more focused on yarn. I mean, they do have other stuff, and what was really nice about Woolen is that they had some special yarn collection, and also they had a person there who was selling their project bags and a few I forget the names, I'm sorry, but some artists and like yarn indie dyers that were there for this special event, which was really fun to see. And again, a smaller store, but with a really nice collection, and they had also like a very cute window display for their yarn store. My friend got some yarn there, and they had a really nice deal where like if you bought $100 worth of yarn products, then you would get a free surprise prize. So I didn't buy anything in this yarn in this store, but my friend did, and she got something free. So that was really cool to see. And also she got 10% off. So like I can really see the appeal of like waiting to go to the yarn crawl and just like buying all the yarn that you want for like a while, because you will get really good discounts and, you know, even sometimes freebies. So that was cool to see. The next stop on our journey, and by now we were a little tired, like we've been walking around all day and like driving around, but we were only on our third store and we were still ready for more yarn stores. So we headed more up north in Brooklyn. I guess you could say that was Bushwick, Williamsburg. I'm not entirely sure. I do not go to this very hip area very often because it's really out of the way from where I live. But this is a store that I was not familiar with at all, other than heard from other people that have been there. And it's called Cleo's. And I really, really like the ambiance of the store in general. It was very colorful, even though it was darker because it was already getting dark, but it was really bright and colorful, a really big space, which I was really surprised about because usually these yarn stores tend to be very like cramped and small, but this was pretty big. And the nice thing about Cleo's is that not only is it a yarn store and craft store, but they also have a cafe. So it seems like a really cool place to hang out, like, you know, we just go buy some coffee or something, knit a little bit, like a group knitting situation, buy some yarn. Like, it just seems like such a good time. And obviously we didn't spend that whole afternoon there like the intention is, but I can totally see that being like a nice like afternoon, a weekend thing to do, especially like when it's, you know, kind of fall or cool weather. So I really, really like the space. They have a smaller selection of yarn compared to some of the other stores. And I don't know if that was just my sense of it because of the size of the shop that is so big, or because some of the other stores that I saw just had so much more yarn. But it was still such a cool vibe, and I really, really enjoy going there. And also, I don't know if it was just for the crawl or in general, but they have like more extended hours. So that they were closing at 8 p.m. and I think it was like around 6-ish that we got there. So it was nice to know that there's one of the yarn stores that like opens later, because again, one of the reasons I don't get to go to a lot of yarn stores in the city is because they usually are closed when I'm available. So I definitely want to go back to Cleo's. It's a little harder to get to because of where it's located for me, but I feel like it still could be such a fun day trip kind of thing for myself for going to Brooklyn. So by now we've visited 4 yarn stores, if you can believe it, and I think the most I've ever visited in a day ever. But there was still time for one more. It was almost closing time, but we made it before they closed, just at the last minute. And this was Brooklyn Craft Company, which is in Greenpoint, I believe. So it was like the northernmost store in Brooklyn. And I also had not heard of this store before. As you can see, I'm not very well versed on yarn stores in the city, especially in Brooklyn. So this was a really like eye-opening experience for me. And Brooklyn Craft Company was really cute. It had some really, really nice decoration, especially like window display, very pink, and because they are a craft store, they have a good collection of yarn, but they also again have notions, fabric, and a whole lot of other things for crafting. So if you're into other things like weaving or cross stitching or sewing or anything else, they probably have something for you. The yarn collection was also a little bit smaller compared to some of the more specialized yarn stores, but they still had some pretty good stuff, you know. They had a lot of wool on the gang and cascade and those types of yarns. So at this point, I was so tired. I remember it gets to a point where like my brain cannot hold as much information about like how much yarn I've seen throughout the day, but I did end up buying one little thing in that store. So that was our yarn crawl kind of journey. So we started down south and just went up to all of the stores. Obviously we missed some of the stores that were in Manhattan because we didn't make it to Manhattan, and at that point I was so tired. I don't think even if I had time the next day to go, I don't know that I could have. So I really see why the yarn crawl is extended throughout 3 days, because I feel like if you want to go to all of the stores, you really need all 3 days to plan out where you're going and when. But it was still really fun to get to go to 5 yarn stores and all of the ones in Brooklyn in just one afternoon, really. We missed some of the stores like Nitty City, which is actually in the Upper West Side, and I tend to be in that area very often. So I think I'm gonna go visit it some other time, and I've seen it before. And a few other stores that I was not familiar with. So I was not able to complete one of the important things about the yarn crawl, which is the scavenger hunt. So each of the yarn stores has a little object hidden in the store, and then if you find it, it has a code and you can write it down, and that's like a special raffle. So I wasn't able to enter that because I didn't go to the ones in Manhattan, but I did find some of the ones in the other stores. So that was cool to do. But now the $1 million question, what did I actually buy and what did I get during the yarn crawl? So here are my yarn crawl purchases, and I'm going to show you the bag got a little crinkle because it was inside my other bag because it was raining and all that, and I didn't want my yarn to get wet. But anyway, here's what I got and where I got it. At Argyle, I bought some of their in-house yarn, which is Luminous Brooklyn. And I got some sock yarn, and I was a little sad because they only had one skin in this colorway, which is called Georgette. It's like a nice little purple colorway. It's so beautiful. I like the thing is, sometimes when I'm not sure what to buy and then I see something and I like keep taking it and putting it back and taking it and put it back and carrying it around, usually I end up going, okay, I think I realized that I really like this and I'm gonna just take it home. So that was the case with this colorway, that I kept seeing it and really liking it. And the reason I was thinking about it was because they only, like I said, they only had one skein, so I wasn't sure that it was going to be enough for what I was thinking I was going to make, because it's only 463 yards. But I thought, like, you know what, if I want it so badly, I should just get it. And it's sock yarn, so I don't have to make that project I had in mind. It could be just socks or something else, or I can go back and buy another one, because they told me like the colorways are pretty like consistent, so it shouldn't look bad if I got, you know, different dye lot. So that's what I got in Argyle. At Brooklyn General, I really got a lot of knitting for Olive. So I actually not seen knitting for Olive in a lot of stores in the US in general. Maybe they do sell it, but I have seen it in other places in Europe, and I've seen it in Canada, but not as much as in the US. So I was like really excited to see some knitting for Olive, because I really love what their yarn feels like and the colors and also the patterns. But I bought this yarn, and I bought, I believe, quite a bunch, about 7 skeins of this, because again, they were 10% off, so it was like really good priced. And I bought them with a cardigan in mind. So there's a cardigan pattern that I want to make, and I don't remember the name at the moment, but I will put it on the screen. And yeah, so they had just enough of that, of the yarn, that I just went ahead and got all the ones that I needed. So this bag is mostly knitting for Olive. I mentioned that the nice thing about Brooklyn General is that they also have notions, and they had some beautiful buttons. I love looking at buttons, and I just kept going back to the button shelf. And so because I am planning on making a cardigan with the knitting for Olive yarn, I went ahead and got some matching buttons. So let me show you what they look like. So there were these beautiful, I don't even know if you can see them, but there were these beautiful buttons that contrast with the yarn. So it looks a little darker, but I thought they were beautiful, and they had so many that I loved, and I only needed 4, so it was perfect. So I could get everything I need for that cardigan that I'm gonna make. And I feel like I struggle to find, but sometimes buttons that I really like, or that are the right size. So I was happy that I found buttons that I was really happy with. Of course, I also had my yarn curl sticker that I'm gonna put on my water bottle, and I have a little pen that you know, of course I had to get these. They were being given away in all of the yarn stores. And the last thing I bought, and this was a Brooklyn Craft Company, was a needle minder, because I also do some cross stitching. So I just really wanted to get one, and it was the perfect opportunity. So I got this cute little needle minder. So I didn't go too crazy with the purchases, because like I said, I'm trying to work through my yarn stash before I acquire too much more yarn, although it's almost impossible. Always at some point I end up buying yarn for one reason or another. But I was really happy that I did it in this situation where I was able to look at the yarn in person and all of these different stores, and like sometimes we were running to the same people from store to store, so they were clearly doing the same path that we were. And now that I've seen all these different stores in Brooklyn and what they have to offer, I am so excited to go back to them at some point, for different reasons. I really like Argyle's Luminous Brooklyn collection. I love the Brooklyn General store for all the notions, and the collection of yarn is great. And especially for quilting fabric, if I ever get back into quilting. And Cleo's was my favorite, just for like hanging out. It have like cute little couches. They look really comfy, and events all the time. So I think I will be joining them at some point again. Even though, like I said, it's kind of hard for me to get to. But now that I know it exists and how big it is, I think it's a really cool place to hang out. So yeah, that was my New York City yarn curl experience. I had a really great time, even despite the weather, and I am very excited to be part of it maybe again in the future next year. I really can see how it is an exciting time, and maybe I will plan it better so that, you know, it gets more divided between several days, because it's definitely very tiring to go to so many yarn stores in a single day. But it was very fun, and it was fun to like hang out with my friend and like hang out in Brooklyn a little bit. And yeah, I'd love to hear if you went to the yarn crawl or if you've been to a similar event somewhere else, or if you would like to visit New York City during the yarn crawl weekend and be part of it. I'd really recommend it if you are into buying yarn, and the 10% discount really goes very far. So I really appreciated that. Well, now that we are in the fall weather, I'm excited to get back into knitting. I had to take a little bit of a break because I hurt my elbow just from, I guess, knitting too much and doing too many things with my arms. So I had to take a break from a few weeks. I'm hoping to like slowly get back into it, start some new projects, and bring you some more videos about those projects. So stay tuned if you want to see more knitting tutorials, some reviews of patterns that I get through, and some new patterns coming up. So subscribe if you're interested in any of that or in vintage knitting, because I also have some of that coming up. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Happy knitting!